Greetings adventurers, this is Kazu, and today we're going to be talking about a rather controversial ruling of critical fumbles in D&D 5th edition and how to make them both a fun and balanced mechanic at your table. For those of you who don't know, critical fumbles are a house rule that usually implements additional disastrous effects when a natural 1 is rolled. Oftentimes these use some sort of critical fumble table that has a specific list of negative outcomes which occur in addition to failing an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. So basically when you roll a nat 1, bad things happen in addition to automatically failing the roll. I've seen quite a few posts and videos that explain why this ruling is terrible from a game design standpoint and how to make it less harmful for players, but I haven't seen any satisfactory advice on how to make critical fumbles a genuinely fun and interesting element of the game, which I really think they are. If you haven't seen it, part 1 was covering how to balance critical fumbles for martial classes versus spellcasters, so if you're curious about that or want to know how to balance this ruling, go ahead and check out that video. But we're going to be discussing in part 2 how to make critical fumbles more fun and engaging for the party through flavor and narrative. So in hindsight, I do think part 1 should have been how to make crit fumbles fun, and then part 2 should be how to balance crit fumbles for martials versus spellcasters. I got the ordering reversed because a lot of people pointed out, balancing it doesn't make it fun per se, right? It makes it more fair, but there's still a lot of issues with crit fumbles, which we are going to address in this video. So what are the main concerns with the crit fumble rules, and how come people don't like using it as a house rule in their table? Firstly, it makes the player characters feel incompetent. So if you're just using a regular crit fumble table, you could roll a nat 1 and then all of a sudden you swing your blade at your ally, or you shoot your friend in the back of the head with an arrow, or even worse is you stumble and fall on your own weapon and deal damage to yourself somehow. These are things that don't make sense, and they sometimes feel just a little too absurd, where you're suspended in disbelief at your character's idiocracy or incompetence, and overall they can prolong the battle if you are having to constantly search up these crit fumble tables and rolling on these crit fumble tables, which we'll get into later. But I am gonna, over the course of this video, address all of these issues and how we can fix them. So before we go over how to address the issues with critical fumbles, I do want to go ahead and explain the purpose of critical failure and fumbles as well. Now, critical failure is meant to be used with critical success. So if you have natural 1s incurring additional negative effects, then you should also be having natural 20s be incurring additional positive effects. This will increase both the risk and reward of rolling and make it way more exciting for the players, because there's always that 5% chance of really bad things happening, but also a 5% chance of them having epic and badass moments. Critical failure also represents the chaotic and unpredictable nature of battle, where sometimes a missed attack is going to result in a lot more things, which force the players to adapt and have to deal with different scenarios where they're going to approach things in a different manner. And last but not least, it's going to make encounters much more memorable, because you always have these small chances for big things to occur that will otherwise make a stale fight turn into something really interesting and engaging for the party. So the first thing we need to address is that crit fumbles make player characters feel hopefully incompetent. How you flavor your fumbles is going to greatly affect how the players will feel about them, and when you explain it as things as tripping over a rock, throwing your weapon away, accidentally stabbing yourself, accidentally hitting an ally that was right next to you that you could obviously see, these are things that are going to make your characters feel less like heroes and more like noobs and novices. Now, critical fumbles are negative effects, so something bad is going to have to happen. You're going to inflict a status condition upon yourself, you're going to take damage, etc., etc. But these are things that don't need to be incurred by player incompetence. You can flavor them and explain them as the enemies being competent or plain bad luck happening to the player. So now let's cover some examples of how to re-flavor your fumbles. For example, if you are disarmed, the assassin skillfully parries and strikes the weapon out of your hands. This shows that the enemy you're fighting against is competent and dodge your attack while also doing something in return. The next example is for taking damage. The manticore flies just out of reach and you wind up caught by a tail spike attack. So rather than having the player strike themselves with their own weapon, they managed to miss an attack that seemed like it was going to hit, and then they got caught by a counterattack from the enemy. Lastly, for the weapon break, As you swing your axe, the damaged axe head flies off just before reaching the neck of your target, and you harmlessly smack them with the shaft of the weapon. So in this case, it's just plain bad luck that happened to your character, causing their weapon to be damaged or broken. So that brings us to our next point, that fumbles should make sense where applicable. So don't always stick to the crit fumble tables. You can adapt the narrative of the fumble so that it makes sense given the context of the situation. In low tiers of play, the adventurers and the low challenge rating enemies are going to often make mistakes. They're still learning the ropes, right? But at high tiers of play, it makes a lot more sense for the adventurers and the enemies to foil each other through their opposed competence, right? The enemies you're going to be fighting against are not idiots. They're skilled just as you are, and they're going to make sure to parry you. They're going to make sure to block your attacks. They're going to make sure to try to trip you up and affect you in ways that are going to have significance in battle, even when it's not their own turn. So when should fumbles be absurd? Well, critical fumbles can be used to add humor or flair to an otherwise stale battle, and they don't need to be done at the expense of a player. You can make absurd critical fumbles and use them on enemy NPCs or even allied NPCs too who aren't going to be the PCs. As an example of this, Meepo, the Kabo Dragon Keeper, swings his short sword wildly, tripping over a rock and throwing his blade into a nearby crevasse. Or perhaps a goblin desperately jumps towards the barbarian to attack him and finds himself skewered by the greatsword instead. These are going to serve as more interesting moments in a fight that can be humorous and entertain the players rather than be harmful for the gameplay. Now, as crit fumbles are a house rule, you can always try to use different alternate rulings to it. For example, if you still want to keep crit fumbles but make them more realistic, you can apply it so that fumbles are only going to happen on non-proficient rolls. When a character performs a roll with any weapon or skill they are not proficient in, then they are subject to crit fumbles if they roll nat ones. For example, if you have a fighter who has trained with a longsword for his entire life, he's never going to have a crit fumble with it. Whereas a wizard who's picking up a longsword for the first time and desperately making a swing with it, they're going to have a good chance of getting that crit fumble and then making a big mistake because they're a complete novice to the weapon. That is going to make a lot more sense from a logical standpoint, but again, just an alternative ruling you can think about if you want to include that in your game as well. So regarding critical fumbles and them prolonging combat or making it take too long, this is a house rule, so you can always remove the usage of crit tables if you want. You don't need to use them. You can come up with the effects on the fly. When an NPC makes a fumble, you can always ask your players how they want it to happen. Involve them in the narration, have them get into the fun, and it'll actually save some effort on your end. You can also lessen the magnitude of the effects, right? Instead of having to roll to see if you hit yourself, you just take 1 point of damage, something minor and small. It changes up the situation a little bit, but not enough to slow down small combat encounters that you want to be over with quickly. So those are going to be kind of the main points of advice and the recommendations I have for making the critical fumble rules fun. I hope you guys found the information insightful or at least interesting in some way, shape, or form. And again, the main purpose of implementing critical fumble rules is to increase both the risk and reward, because you should also be using this with critical successes. But again, mainly you're challenging the players by adding these dynamic elements that can occur on a whim, 5% chance of rolling a nat 1, and then having bad effects occur due to either player mistakes, which we've shown how to minimize, or enemy competence, or just plain bad luck. Either way it happens, however you want to flavor it, these outcomes are again going to push the players so that they have to overcome adversity, and in doing so are going to get greater feelings of satisfaction. They're going to get more feelings of accomplishment when they defeat these encounters, when they overcome these battles. And overall, it just makes things more memorable and exciting, in my opinion, and through my experience as a DM and a player. So please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content in the video. I am going to be making more D&D videos later, probably not as many on, this hot button topic such as crit fumbles, which I know a lot of players really strongly dislike, but hopefully with the tips and tricks in this video, you're going to have maybe a different opinion on it. Maybe you can see using this on your own table and finding ways to make it more exciting as well. And if you don't, that's also totally fine. It's a house rule. You can choose not to run it if you dislike it. But that's going to be pretty much it for the video, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.